Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Activism at a Distance Salon on Peace and Climate. My name is Carolyn Parker. I am chair of the American Ethical Union Ethical Action Committee. Jake is going to show us the slide that tells you a little bit about the committee. Yes, just give you a quick notion of what our mission is, that we are looking at community strengthening and local change as well as systemic change. And this event is sponsored by the Ethical Action Committee. The members of the committee, several of whom are with us tonight, are listed on this slide. I want to thank them for the work that they've done to help make this possible and point out that there's room for you if you are interested in doing more about ethical action within AEU. There are a couple of housekeeping notes for this evening on the next slide. That is, we are, when we start the presentation, going to mute everyone. And chat will also be disabled for the duration of the presentation. You can, however, if there's an urgent message, see the message, send the messages to the host, but we will now mute chat. The questions with the end will be, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Questions can be posted on chat at the end of the presentation. If something comes up that you might need to remind yourself, do make a note of it so that you can post it in chat when the time comes. The presentation is being recorded for future viewing, and an edited transcript will be prepared when we have the resources to do it. Now, tonight, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you our moderator. That would be the next slide, Jake. Thank you. Dr. Nori Rost is our moderator this evening. She is the clergy leader, chief leader at NYSEC, New York Society for Ethical Culture. As you can see in her biography, she has served as a minister with All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Colorado Springs, and also with the Metropolitan Community Church for quite a number of years. She is clearly passionate about social justice. She began almost immediately with demonstrating in front of the Russian consulate in New York when Russia invaded Ukraine. When we asked her on the National Ethical Service if she was interested in participating in more work on sustainable development goals, she jumped right in. So we're very pleased to have her here this evening to moderate the discussion. And I will turn it over to Nori now.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And if you want to get off the slideshow, Jake, so that people can see who's speaking while there's not a slide that needs to be used, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome to our salon tonight. We're very glad you joined us. In case, I don't know if you're all with ethical culture or not, but just in case you aren't, the Society for Ethical Culture was founded in 1876 by Felix Adler. It was kind of providing an alternative way of looking at how should we live our lives. And instead of relying on a creed or a certain set of beliefs or a belief in a certain deity, Felix Adler said it's really not about what we believe happens after we die, but it's how we choose to live our lives right now. So it's how we act. His rallying cry was deeds above creed. So welcome. And this salon was conceived as a result of several conversations between ethical culture leaders on what a unified statement of response to the Russian attack on Ukraine could look like. While at first blush, one might think this would be easy to craft, it soon became apparent that there was a diversity of opinion on what that response should be. We were all clear on the fact that we don't support the war, but how should we respond? Ethical culture was founded on the basis that we have it within ourselves to create a more just, equitable society, that when we seek to elicit the best in others, we find it within ourselves as well. But that's not exactly an instruction manual for just how to do that. Being non-creedal means that we are each responsible for determining how to best embody the values and ideals set forth first by Felix Adler and then expanded upon in each generation as we gain new understanding of what it means to be human in relation to other humans as well as the rest of the planet. So we decided to host this salon to model what it looks like when ethical people thoughtfully share their perspectives on what a just ethical response could be to Russia's act of aggression against Ukraine. This models not only how to have differences of opinion on a topic, but that there are different ways, ethical ways to respond. Not only do we get the benefit of the care given by these leaders in addressing this, it can also spur within us the desire to bring our own critical engagement to this situation and others we face daily in our lives. So welcome. I invite you to bring a curious mind and an open heart to this conversation, to let go of the need to have a right answer and be willing to explore several possibilities, to bring a WTF attitude to the salon. In this case, WTF stands for, wasn't that fascinating, in response to each leader's ideas. Following their statements, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. You'll be invited to write them in the chat and we will read them aloud. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to give a primary statement on what their responses are to this question, or these questions, I should say. Has ethical culture, what should our ethical response be to the war in Ukraine? What are you doing in your own societies to respond to this crisis? What are the root causes of this war and others? And how can we, as ethical culture, influence the world in such a way as to create a culture of peace and equity going forward? That's a lot to bite off, isn't it? But we're going to do that now. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's James Croft, and you could bring that slide up. James Croft is the leader of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, educated at Cambridge and Harvard. He is a contributor to the Oxford Handbook of Humanism, and his work is published in numerous academic journals and popular publications. A humanist activist and speaker, James was raised on Shakespeare, Carl Sagan, and Star Trek, and lives in St. Louis, Missouri with his husband Colton and their Chihuahua, Ella. James, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Nori, and to everyone for putting together this important discussion. I am going to quickly share my screen, but I'm going to stop doing it throughout as I need or don't need the slides. My remarks today are going to focus only on the first question that Nori asked, because I wanted to give it as full possible consideration. What should our ethical response be to the invasion of Ukraine? My father's father fought in World War II. He was an aircraft gunner, a captain in the Royal Artillery, service number 98743, and apparently he was very good at it. My mother tells me that she and my dad used to go clay pigeon shooting, which I find hard to imagine knowing my dad, but that my father had apparently inherited some of his father's marksmanship skills, which were legendary in his unit. But that did not stop my grandfather from getting captured and held in a German prisoner of war camp for some time. This is his intake form, which shows, you can see his name there, Croft Frederick, which is also my father's name. And on the top left, you can see a stamp detailing where he was sent, Stalag 4B Mühlberg. My grandfather tried to escape that camp more than once, and twice he successfully got out of it before being recaptured. But after the second escape attempt, the Germans sewed a symbol into his clothing to show that if he tried to escape again, he could be shot. But he survived the war and returned home, and hardly ever spoke of his experiences. My mother's father took a different path. This is him with myself on the left, my little brother, and my sister. He gave up a hard-won organ scholarship to Oxford to join the Royal Air Force to serve his country. He traveled to Canada to train on Lancaster bombers, one of Britain's most effective weapons in the war, responsible for the legendary assault on German dams, which would later be dramatized in the film The Dam Busters. He successfully completed his training and won his RAF wings and looked set for a military career. But the very same commitment to his values that led him away from Oxford to the RAF then caused him to become a conscientious objector. He simply came to believe that killing people was wrong and that he could not take a human life. And that decision was its own sort of bravery. Conscientious objectors, known derisively as conchies throughout the war, were subject to considerable social stigma at the time. And there were more concrete consequences too. He was stripped of his RAF wings and spent 6 months in Gloucester jail, all for following his conscience where it led. This dual inheritance is perhaps why I approach the topic of the ethics of war and peace with a certain ambivalence. Ambivalence in its truest sense, meaning not a lack of care, but a surfeit of care on two different sides of the argument. On the one hand, I deeply respect the bravery of my father's father in choosing to fight against the Nazis. If there ever was a just war, then surely World War II was one. On the other hand, I am awed by the courage of my mother's father in resisting the social pressures and expectations of his day and adhering to his own nonviolent principles, despite everything it cost him. Perhaps no surprise then that when faced with situations like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I am of two minds. Part of me says we should do everything responsible and in our power to help the people of Ukraine defend their own country from this unprovoked illegal invasion, including sending them the weapons they need to fight back. Another part of me worries that sending so many weapons to Ukraine risks prolonging an unwinnable conflict and will ultimately lead to more lives lost, more infrastructure destroyed, more difficulty establishing a lasting peace. These are complex ethical issues with no simple answer. To be too convinced of the rightness of our own response would betoken too little skepticism of our own perspective. Ultimately, however, despite the complexities involved, we all, as ethical actors, are called to make a choice. And ethical culture leaders especially so. We are, after all, tasked by our societies and our movement with being voices of moral clarity and courage. And at times of uncertainty and doubt, we are supposed to provide some guidance. So today, with some hesitation, I come down on the side of supporting sending arms to Ukraine to help its citizens fight back. And I argued as much that the American Ethical Union's statement on the invasion of Ukraine should advocate for that policy. Argued unsuccessfully, as it turned out, I found myself in the minority amongst my colleagues, at least amongst those who get to write the statements. I'm not, however, in a minority among ethicists, foreign policy experts, military analysts, politicians, and world governments, because since the AEU passed its statement, the international community has sent vast amounts of weaponry to Ukraine. The US alone has given more than $3 billion of military aid to Ukraine, but we're hardly alone. As Politico reports, 33 countries all around the world, from Australia to Turkey, have donated arms and armor to the cause. Now, the fact that all these countries are doing this does not make it ethically right. Of course, all the countries could be wrong. We could instead encourage the Ukrainians to engage in non-violent forms of protest as their country is invaded, and support efforts at peacemaking which do not involve arming the Ukrainian people. And that is not necessarily hopelessly naive. Nonviolent action can and has been extremely successful. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan, who chronicled in their 2011 book, Why Civil Resistance Works, a lot of research on the topic, argue reasonably persuasively that nonviolent resistance is often more effective than violent opposition, even in the face of overwhelming odds, and tends to lead to more peaceful long-term outcomes. There is a history of successful nonviolent resistance in Ukraine itself as when unarmed residents in Mariupol succeeded in driving out armed pro-Russian forces back in 2014. We've even seen inspiring examples of nonviolent action during this war, as when this Ukrainian citizen kneeled down in front of a Russian tank to stop its progress. Nonviolent resistance often works and often results in a more secure and lasting peace once the conflict is over. Furthermore, there's a long, proud history of nonviolent struggle within the humanist movement. Humanists in India used nonviolent tactics to encourage the eradication of caste distinctions. Humanists in the USA, including some of my own members at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, used nonviolent tactics to promote civil rights. Humanists have opposed many wars using nonviolent tactics. Nonviolence is an honored tradition within humanist circles and often is the most effective and principled way to protect human dignity and promote recognition of human worth. But often is not always. Sometimes, I believe, violence is both ethically justified and may even be necessary to secure an ethical outcome. And I think that enabling the Ukrainians to fight back against those invading their country is such a time. Remember this, the Ukrainians are not a people attempting to overthrow an autocratic regime in their own country, or people trying to change an unjust law. They are resisting an unprovoked and violent invasion. Ukraine is not a country seeking its independence from an occupying force. Rather, it is trying to resist the initial occupation. We shouldn't need reminding that Russian forces have repeatedly targeted civilian sites, including schools and power stations, apartment buildings, and hospitals. Russia has breached numerous agreed upon ceasefires to shell civilians trying to flee. And every day uncovers more evidence of grievous war crimes, from mass rapes to mass graves. Ukrainian families are being killed by mortar shells and missiles and bullets. Civilians are being tortured and executed in the streets. Children included. And I submit they have a moral right to fight back. And we, as an extremely powerful nation with the ability to assist, have a moral responsibility to help them do so. This is not, in fact, ethically controversial. The right to defend ourselves when we are attacked is enshrined in every legal and moral system of which I am aware, as is the right of an invaded people to fight the invaders. The vast majority of both ethicists and experts in violent conflict agree that citizens of a nation under attack have the moral right to resist. From the moment Russia illegally entered Ukraine, Ukraine was legally entitled to respond with force. The Ukrainian military response to protect its citizens is sanctioned under international law, and armed resistance to an occupying force is entirely consistent with the ethical principles underlining the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose third article states everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person, and that right entails the right to protect ourselves from armed assault. Even some of the people whose work is explicitly dedicated to building peace agree with this analysis. For instance, Sebastian van Balen and Isaac Svensson, both professors in the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University, wrote just last month, "It is unlikely that nonviolent resistance against Russian aggression by itself can stop Putin. Ukraine and the democratic world need all available means to fight." All available means. Nor is my view anathema even to the far left, Nicholas Guillot, writing in the uber-left publication Jacobin, exclaimed recently, Kiev deserves all possible assistance, short of direct military engagement, in its effort to repel the invasion and reach a diplomatic settlement. Importantly, the assistance we are providing the people of Ukraine to resist Russian aggression is working. Consider what has happened since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, just under 2 months ago. Russia began with a bombardment of cruise and ballistic missiles, which started within minutes of its announcement of what they euphemistically call a special military operation. Russian troops landed immediately afterwards and began their assault, and the expectation was that Russia would swiftly succeed in toppling the Ukrainian government, encircling Ukrainian forces, and securing regime change. There were numerous articles, like this one, published on the first day of the fighting and informed by intelligence and military sources here in the US, which said they expected the government of Ukraine to fall in days. But 56 days later, Russia has been forced to pull out of much of Ukraine and is refocusing its efforts in the country's eastern region. The Moskva warship, pride of the Russian fleet, is sunk. Russian tanks have been stranded and destroyed, and many of the successes of the Ukrainian people in resisting Russian aggression are directly due to the support they have received from other countries, including the United States. Even writers skeptical of sending more weaponry to Ukraine, like The Guardian's Rajan Anon, admit that Western training and weaponry have unquestionably helped Ukraine destroy a lot of Russian armor and aircraft. So as I close, I want you to imagine, just imagine, what would have happened had we not sent the military assistance we have sent to Ukraine during this war. I believe that the Ukrainian government may already have been deposed, replaced with a Russian puppet government, and we would not even know what atrocities the Russian army would be committing against the Ukrainian people. I contend that this position is, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, fully consistent with ethical humanism and is well within the boundaries established by past statements of the American Ethical Union. In fact, I found this statement from the American Ethical Union's board and the National Leaders Council in 2003, which says so explicitly. Though not a pacifist organization, ethical culture considers violence and war the last resort, and you can read it for yourselves. I'll just finish by saying, I wasn't an ethical culture leader when this was passed, but I know two people who were, my fellow panelists, Bart and Curt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Very thoughtfully said. Our next panelist is Curt Collier, an ethical culture leader for over 25 years. Curt has served 5 ethical societies and helped to found the Austin Society. He is currently the leader of the Bergen Ethical Culture Society and a consulting leader for the Ethical Culture Society of Silicon Valley. For the past 15 years, Collier was the National Youth Programs Director for Groundwork USA, an environmental organization created by the National Park Service and the EPA, and has developed youth programs and core in 20 US cities and 25 national parks. Collier has worked closely with the National Park Service, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and with NASA to create career training pipelines for young adults, and has presented research on youth engagement before the American Academy for the Advancement of Science and Sigma, I don't know how to say that, Sigma, you can say that, Curt, the National Science Research Society. He's a single father and travels frequently between his work in New Jersey and his home in Virginia. Welcome, Curt. You'll have 15 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. You know, when we got together to talk about what we were going to say and how we were going to say it, of course, one of the things that we all three leaders, of course, recognize is that this is also just a time to be sad. Once again, as all these times are, and we're not trying to move past just those feelings and all the ways that we should be responding to our community, and to just maybe coming here also to hold hands. We also know that this is a well-read, media savvy group and full of ideas, and are also looking for other topics for us to talk about, which is, as we said, which is, the focus on root causes and what we should do and how we should think about it. Next slide, please. Of course, I take this in light of the other things that are going on, including the current war in Aleppo, which is still going on, the troubles in Afghanistan in the top right corner there, the ongoing war in Yemen, and then down near my hometown in Texas, on the border there, the ongoing struggles. I was raised on the Mexican border and went into Mexico hundreds of times. It's impossible to say my family's favorite place to go for dinner. And it went from, of course, a very, very kind of peaceful, fun-loving place into one ruled by gangs. This also kind of gets informed of my thinking, spending time in Israel at the end of the Lebanese war. I've been to places like Sarajevo, which is 6 years after the war, and saw the damage going on nonstop, even 6 years after conflict. I know the Ukrainians have a long road home, but these pictures here highlight the fact that there is conflict going on around the world, and that our pattern as ethical culture should also be consistently to think about all these things collectively and how we can respond to them. And just a brief kind of highlight, next slide. There, of course, is Mariupol, next city, next slide, please. There's actually, that's Mariupol, the former one was Donetsk. Next slide, please. This is the city of Luhansk, or the area of Luhansk, keep going. Slides from the Donbass region, keep going, and so on. And so it's easy, of course, as a biocentrist, as I would tell people, I'm not a humanist, I'm a biocentrist, to think about kind of the issues and the conflicts. And of course, what Russia hopes to conquer, of course, is just those places right there. Now, it'd be overly simplistic of me to say that this is a war of oil. We like to say that was our main criticism about Iraq and Kuwait and others. But these are kind of, the reality is that if the areas that he wants, of course, are those particular areas right there, and for very good reasons. Next slide. It's all these conflicts. In fact, one we just got out of, or just pulled ourselves out of, is our ongoing kind of battle with ISIS and controlling of them. You can look where even in ISIS controlled areas there in Syria, where the oil fields and the gas field. Next slide. And if you contrast that, of course, with where ISIS regained control, you can see precisely the types of lands that they wanted to keep going on. We can travel around the world and look at conflicts such as one in the Horn of Africa there between Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, those areas, Boko Haram acting in this area, and the massive amount of oil fields and resources in that area. And of course, it's not just about oil. Next slide. We can go back to the war of Somalia, El Salvador, and think of all the third largest group of people heading to at our border right now. We just went through this major areas of guerrilla influence and warfare about 10 years ago that have never settled down. And next slide. And just look at where of course, the gold belt and the gold mines are located within those areas as well. And the next slide. And also just to continuing to go about the Democratic Republic of Congo. And these are things that, of course, most ethical culturists think about. And so it brings me to an interesting question. What is really kind of the roots of a lot of these causes? Are they just about philosophies, or are they ideas? Or what are really, really driving these things? What are the fueling these things? Why do people go into certain areas? I know there have been books that have disputed the fact that the reason why the Japanese went into Burma was not just because of oil, but it's ironic that what is now called Myanmar, that's where the oil fields were. So I'm not quite sure that is. And if you certainly look at the history of colonialism, it has been to go exactly where the wealth and diamonds and gold and minerals were, and we continue to do that with ongoing fights around fossil fuels and those kinds of stuff. Next slide. So I think when you're, like I said, as a biocentrist, I try to think about what are the models. What's a model for what's going on here, and which can describe what's kind of going on even in the Ukraine. For those of you who don't know, the Ethical Society here in Bergen County, of course, one of our plans is once we can, probably it won't be until this fall, and I have to tell you, it may not be until much, much later into next year, that when hostilities reach some kind of a temporary ceasefire, I think it won't be until then, that we're going to be forming a delegation to go over through Slovakia and through Trinec, where I have my contacts in the Czech Republic and around the border there. These are all pretty modern countries. You need to remember, that's one of the things that I think is so upsetting, is that we know that these are pretty advanced modern nations, and we're going to be planning on working directly with groups there and figuring out ways that we can provide assistance. And if any of you would like to be a part of the delegation, you're certainly invited to do so. But I think it's important to think about what is our model, like how do we deal with conflict overall around the world? How do we think of these things? What drives them? What are the consequences? And, you know, I often kind of remind people that we often think of ourselves as being this very special, unique being that's at the center of the universe, but actually we respond pretty much the same way to conflicts as any other group or any other species on this planet responds to conflict. We're actually pretty consistent in that. Next slide. You know, for me, of course, as someone who tries to think of natural models, of course, is the focus on what we might call homeostasis on one end, which is the desire of all species to seek food and shelter and water and balance and community and protection and comfort, which is a big driver for all of us, right? Here in the West, or as it is in Somalia, as it is in Southeast Asia, that we all have the same kind of needs for this balance, for harmony, for wellness, for protection for our children, for biodiversity, for places to grow food, and that our body basically kind of responds to this natural urge in order to do that. And we will do whatever it takes in order for us to protect those things and to kind of make sure that they're in place. In fact, that drive is so powerful that it can lead us to do all kinds of things in the name of other kind of rationalized ideas just to meet the basic needs of our group, our people, our land, our family, and ultimately even to ourselves. The other thing that you have, of course, is the drive, a biological drive to what we call adaptation, and where groups want to thrive, they want to flourish. It's not just hitting homeostasis in existence, but it's also to grow, to expand, to adapt, and to readily make change. And I think it's really interesting when, you know, just kind of reflecting on that trying to think about what might kind of be some of the driving behind that. And I like to look at our own country to think about things. You know, Trump kind of focused on that homeostasis, right? By here, I'm going to get you jobs, and people are taking away your livelihood. They're depriving you of work. People are coming across the border and attacking your children and all those kind of stuff. And you did it by demonizing others who you perceive were threats. You know, while at the same time, he was upholding ideas of flourishing with this great America future, of course, without delivering on any means to get any people there. But he kind of maintains this kind of cult status by directing to those two main biological needs, which is not only to kind of to exist, but to continue to grow. Next slide. And so when you look at models, you have to look at kind of what the United Nations does, is to think about what are the drivers. You know, this destabilization is one of the common reads that lead to conflict today after World War II. The destabilizations and civil wars that have kind of plagued that'll usually then allows for foreign actors or outside groups to trying to move in and kind of capitalize on that to gain access to the market. The lack of technical resources in the economy, which stops people from kind of developing their own ability to thrive or to flourish or to provide food for their family, and then opening it up for groups like United Fruit to move into Central America and basically snap up 45% of a place like Guatemala. It's also the government's unable to respond to the needs because they don't have maybe the connections with other or sense of violations, the slow and uneven economic growth, which plagues our own nation, followed by large amounts of migration, rise of organized crime, like we see in Mexico, and the marginalization, explosion of populations. And each of these things, we could just say, we can talk about the ethics of what people should do and the prospects of peace, or we can just look at what people are often trying to do, which is to lead to kind of protecting of their own kind of homeland, their homeostasis and things like that. And then when they don't feel that, how they respond by victimizing, demonizing, and moving into other areas and attacking them because they feel in a way to do that, which is kind of a classic Russian move to aggressively fear the entire world, to build a buffer zone around you and then attack anyone, of course, who they think is in the way of that. Next slide. Just want to kind of point this population to kind of, this map's is helpful because it helps you think, where do most people in Russia live? Most of them, of course, live near the border of Ukraine. You can look at the bottom left-hand corner. This map says if each of the areas of Russia were a different state, how many people in there. No one lives in Siberia, out there in Kamchatka Peninsula. My mind just went blank. There is population of maybe 760, about the same as 60,000, about the same as Alaska. Montana has about 1 million people. Almost everybody in Russia lives in that bottom left-hand zone there. There were the reasons for that. Next slide. Of course, historically, that's where, of course, the food is. If you look at the United States here on the bottom left and looking at plant hardiness, you can look at the zones there, and you can see the Caspian Sea right there, and just above it, Crimea, and the Black Sea. And then just above that, you can see the outline of Ukraine. And then you start getting into areas of Russia, and you can see right then they're already what we would call zone 4, which is the reason why they grow wheat, right? Not spring wheat necessarily, what we call winter wheat or spring wheat. And then they're producing large amounts of yields to feed, and that's where most of the people are producing just a little bit more. And what we do in those areas you see highlighted there in the United States. And this is kind of a big thing for the Russians, who are moving not only into Ukraine, of course, because of resources and fossil fuels and things like that, but because of the food. Iowa may be our breadbasket, but the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. And so without kind of looking at these big pictures of why people are trying to do things, I think it's kind of leads us astray about what this really is, and we get caught up in rhetoric that's really not that helpful. Next slide. And actually want to have you stop the slides for a second. The reason why the Russians are not advancing as well as they are in Ukraine, it's not just because of Western weapons. By the way, I come from a military family. Also, my father worked for the Department of Defense. My older brother's lieutenant commander in the Navy, and my other brother's major in the Marine Corps. And I grew up around military people for quite a long time. I was in the ROTC for a couple of years myself before they got to the don't ask, don't tell part, and I told. So there you go. But
1 minute.
Yeah, if you think about what's going on and the struggles there, he's having a much more difficult time than he imagined. And you can't just say it's because of the Western weapons. And by all means, I kind of support what James is saying about providing them with Western weapons. But what stops him is the Ukrainian people themselves, their own connectivity, their own piece of land. I think what the advantage was is that back in 2004, during the Orange Revolution, some of you may remember that was going on in Ukraine. It was a fight between one president who got elected and another who said he didn't get elected by fair means, if that sounds familiar. And then, of course, they had this huge kind of revolutionary struggle between that, and that led to them holding more and more elections until Yushchenko was elected, if you remember back in 24. But actually, the reason why Yushchenko eventually was, and they were able to throw away the people who kind of swayed the election in their terms towards Yushchenko, was actually because of what's called the poor movement in poor.
Thank you, Curt. If you could
Yeah,
just wrap
one
it up.
second, in Ukraine. And basically what he attempts to do is they tend to organize people and got them together and build a series of small collected cells across them who are connected into a community. And that is actually what Putin didn't have in his own country. He didn't have that sense of connection and communities of small local groups. And that's
Thank you.
actually the resistance. And that's where I think we should be putting our efforts.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, another very thoughtful presentation. Thank you. Our final panelist is Bart Worden. He is the Executive Director of the American Ethical Union and clergy leader of Westchester Community for Ethical Culture. Bart has also worked extensively in the area of community behavioral health as direct care provider, program developer, and administrator. Bart's recent social justice efforts have focused on addressing bias and discrimination in communities in Westchester County, New York, and he is a member of the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform, and he chairs a committee on systemic racism in housing. He earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy of religion from Hope College, a master's degree in social work from New York University, and is a graduate of the Human Studies program. Welcome, Bart. You'll have 15 minutes.
I'm going to be focusing on that third question, what are the root causes of this war and others, and how can we as ethical culture influence the world to create a culture of peace and equity going forward? I'm starting with this question because first I see the Russian invasion of Ukraine as one episode in a very long series of efforts to use violent means to achieve or sustain dominance over others. And I see this particular war within a broader context of cultures around the world that have legitimized the use of force to gain and hold power while turning a blind eye to the destructiveness of violence and to the very limited effectiveness of that violence to achieve desired ends. And let me just say, our country has not been a non-participant in this kind of activity. We just left Afghanistan, as I recall, kind of. And you have to wonder, with the billions of dollars dumped into that particular effort, how that was really working out. Homo sapiens has been a quick study with some aspects of living, such as the development of tools and technologies to increase power and control over transportation, living spaces, various consumables. At the same time, Homo sapiens has been extremely slow in learning basic social skills or developing cultures that encourage self-regulation and cooperation beyond one's rather immediate social spheres. Now, I've taken what may seem like a hard-line view that violence resistance is both wrong and ineffective. A number of people have indicated that my views are naive and ill-informed, that historically violence has been with us always and is deeply baked into human nature. I'm willing to grant that there have been and continue to be acts of violence and destructiveness. I also hold that the core of humanity is not destructive, but is rather based upon the love and caring people experience from an early age, a love and caring that comes to extend beyond one's immediate family to a broader social context. Quite frankly, if you weren't loved as a child, if you didn't have loving relationships, even now, you would not be the human being that you are. And my guess, and not just a guess, I'm pretty sure this is a fact, most people spend most of their time in cooperative enterprises, right? Violence is the aberration, not the norm. And that isn't to say that any one of us is incapable of violence. Given the right circumstances, anyone I know, and I'm certainly including me in this list, can be induced to commit violence in some form or another. But what is the norm for human existence? What is the norm of our lives? And if violence is really an aberration, why are we doing so little to prevent it? Right? Our culture has so many lines of violence streaming through it, right? In our punitive nature, our mass incarceration, our police force that are beating people up, just name it. All the punitive aspects of our culture really have a violent quality, right? Which is to say, there's going to be a domination of those that can be dominated, and it's going to be expressed. And if there's resistance to that, the level of force will start increasing to make sure that there's compliance, right? Wars are an extreme manifestation of this same kind of violence, but I don't know that it's so wildly different. What's different is the extremity of it, not necessarily the basis of it. And I think for ethical culture, looking at the broader picture, people wonder, what can I do about this? Well, you know, the budget for the national organization is under, well under $1 million, probably under $500,000. And how many billions of dollars has been sent over in arms just by the United States alone into the Ukraine at this moment, right? When we're thinking about what we can do, I don't think there's much we can do within our small group to affect the war, to affect the outcome of the war, except if we can find more ways to be an outlier around the culture of peace. I don't think it's correct to think that because there's been signs that people are jumping on board to say, you know, we really have to help Ukraine defend itself, that necessarily is what people would be saying, even those who live in Ukraine, if asked the question. For myself, if I was posed to the question, well, would you be okay with living with under a tyrannical regime if that meant we were not going to blow you up, if that meant we're not going to kill your family right now? I mean, I don't think I could answer in that question. And let's think about the people who are actually dying, right? Starting probably in World War I think was the first time I know of where there were more civilians killed than combatants. And certainly World War II far outstripped. We destroyed entire cities during World War II. Millions and millions of people died. Many of them people had no weapons in their hands ever, right? Wars are destructive. And they're not just destructive in the immediate time. Think of the famines that extend beyond the wartime, right? Think of the entire infrastructure that's been destroyed that has to be rebuilt, right? And why are we counting these as part of the calculation about whether it makes sense to go to war, whether it makes sense to pour more arms into a country that's already embattled? I just don't get that. And the big problem I see is that people are caught by the fearsomeness of what's going on. And it's hard not to be, right? When you think about planes coming and armored vehicles streaming over your border, that is scary as hell. I get that. The thing is, if we allow fear to be the main decider, the thing that drives our decisions, we're really cutting ourselves off from so many possibilities. Right? When people have a fight or flight thing going on, they experience kind of a tunnel vision, right? They kind of lose track of so many things that are going on because they need to focus their time and energy and attention on escaping harm or on finding a weapon to stop someone from harming them, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that drives it. But there are so many other things that could be in people's minds, and yet that gets kind of driven away. You know, so I don't think anyone batted an eye when they added more money to the military budget in this country, when there's already billions and billions there. And I don't think anyone said, by the way, while we're at it, let's see if we can really explore. I know James had mentioned the Why Civil Resistance Works book by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan. You know, they found over 100 years that nonviolent civil resistance was twice as effective as violent resistance to making regime change, and especially making regime change that sticks, right? Twice as effective. And yet, are we really thinking about this? Are we really exploring this and really putting our time and attention into understanding what are other options for dealing with situations where someone is trying to dominate another? So getting back to the second part of that question, Nick, when I start thinking about, well, what should ethical societies do? I think ethical societies should be really focusing their attention on what it means to develop a real culture of peace. I cannot square the idea that if we're saying every person has unique worth and dignity, with the idea that at times we're going to kill some of those people. That's just not going to square with me. It's not going to square ever. And so I'll come down to the point of saying it's understandable that people would do that, but it's not ethical. And it's not ethical to avoid figuring out multiple ways that we can get engaged in our efforts to resolve issues that don't end in people destroying each other. Destructiveness has an erosive quality for everybody. You know, think about the people in Ukraine that are now using violent resistance to try to protect their country. I just read recently that there's cluster bombs that have been used by Ukraine against the Russians. You know, you start losing, I forget what this cluster, either way, you start losing the restrictions, you know, only go so far. Well, that will only hold so long. And that's true coming from the other direction too. You know, how much is the intensity of this war being driven by outside forces pouring in armaments to Ukraine? How much is that really making things worse rather than better? And so for me, when it comes down to the end of it, let's put our time and attention into figuring out how we can be better at getting along with each other, even in our own neighborhoods, even in our own families. How can we look to see how communities can really do more to work in a nonviolent way to make change happen? How can we do more studies to understand how whole populations can really resist, without taking up arms, the incursion of others that would try to dominate their lives? I think if we put our time and attention into that, we'd all be much better off. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bart. So there you have it, 3 very thoughtful responses to what's happening in Ukraine. And we will now open up the chat again. If you would like to ask a question, just put that in the chat and I will read that aloud and open that up. If you have one to a specific person, that's fine, but we'll give all 3 panelists always the chance to respond. Don't be shy. While we're waiting for questions to be asked, I would like to invite any of the panelists to maybe give a response to the other 2, that something that brought up for them that they would like to share, maybe a new awareness or.
Sure, I'm happy to say a little bit, since I can't deal with silence.
Me either.
I appreciate Curt calling us to look at the broader contextual factors and the bigger issues, and I agree with an awful lot of what Bart said as well about how incredibly violent our culture is and how difficult it seems to be to focus people on methods for peacemaking. What struck me, though, was the idea that it is somehow in tension with honoring the worth and dignity of every person to prevent people from killing people. I don't understand that point of view. If someone is trying to take my life and I have to use violence to stop them, doing so is not an affront to their dignity, but an assertion of my own. If I were to instead allow the aggressor to kill me because I'm committed to nonviolence, I'm not honoring their equal worth. I'm placing their worth above mine. I'm placing their desire to kill me above my right to live. And I think that's a dangerous ethical mistake. It's the sort of ethical mistake that led even giants like Gandhi to suggest that, for instance, the Jews should have gone willingly to the gas chambers. I think that's a horrifying misstep, and it's based on a misunderstanding of our own human dignity and the value of ourselves.
Thank you. And because I opened up that invitation, Bart and Curt, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make a statement. And now we are getting some questions, which I'll take after that.
Sure, I'm happy
Thank you, James.
to respond. You know, I think the mistake that is often made is to imagine that the only way to counter violence is with violence. You know, one of the things that I remember from trainings around people that were being accosted who were much weaker than the aggressor was that doing things that made the aggressor angry actually reduced your chances of getting out of there alive, right? And what I'm really calling for is more thoughtfulness around how we actually respond, and not getting caught into this understanding that it's simple and that it's, you know, eye for an eye or prevent eye for an eye, but that there really ought to be a range of things that can happen when there's a scene. And I also, again, when I do put myself into a situation where I am violent towards another, I really feel a huge loss of my own humanity. And even if that's protecting others, there's a real loss there. And I'm not saying it never happens that we'll do this. And I'm not saying it's inexcusable that people become violent. I mean, it's understandable. It is part of a likely part of our nature. But it's not, that's not where we should leave it. That's my point.
Thank you. Curt, do you have anything you want to add before I begin to read the questions?
Let's go ahead and go to some questions. I may say something later.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first one is from Diane Kay, who asks, is anyone able to give an example where nonviolence worked against weapons on a scale such as what's happening right now in Ukraine, Russia? Thanks.
I guess I take that one too.
If you know the answer.
Well, I guess the first thing is, what do you mean by worked? You know, I think that's a really important question that's not asked nearly enough. But I also, I do recommend that book that both James and I referred to, the Chenoweth book. So they have some really interesting items in there in terms of what whole groups did. And a particular thing is the broader your collection of people participating in citizen nonviolent action, the more likely it is you're going to have a strong outcome. So a lot has to do with the numbers of people that you can generate. So the big country should have a better shot.
Thank you, Curt.
I think, while I agree with that, Bart, that the importance of small groups to make differences and do change, especially if they're connected with other groups, which is the story I was talking about Poro before I ran out of time. I think the problem is that you also have to be able to provide something for that group, right? They have to feel included, safe, they have to have a place, all this good stuff. And if we don't do that, we could just say, oh, we're going to stand in resistance, but there's no kind of sense of protection in other kinds of ways. We're not providing them, we're not giving them an out. They'll feel, left behind. I can agree that that actually weakens their resolve and leads to other kinds of problems as well. And so it's not enough, I think, just to say, let's all just kind of resist. We resist because we're part of something else, right? There's an alternative. We know what the alternative is, and the alternative is working, and it presents a brighter future.
Thank you. James, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I definitely recommend, along with Bart, the book Why Civil Resistance Works. I've linked it in the chat so people can look it up. It's a good analysis of some data about nonviolent resistance. I would caution that there's been serious critique of its statistical methods. I think that many of the examples that they look at and categorize as nonviolent had violence in them, and so the definitions are difficult. There's definitely no example in that book of any people successfully resisting a modern invasion like the one Russia is engaged in Ukraine purely through nonviolent action.
Thank you, and thanks for the link. The next is more of a statement from Jean. We're doing more than just sending arms. We are trying to boycott Russia, and that can be very useful. That's true. Anybody want to follow up with that statement? Or the next question is by Jeff. Should we not be building an ethical culture frame based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which comes close to attributing worth to every individual and their social relationship? Anybody want to respond?
Well, those questions are their statements.
Well, I don't know. I thought, shouldn't we? I think he formed it kind of in a question, but I don't know if you want to say anything about the Declaration of Human Rights. If not, we'll go on to the next one. This is a question. How does Bart's goal for peace allow for bullies like Putin? One bad apple seems to mess everything up, from Ann Carter. So Bart, you want to respond to that?
Sure.
You're muted. You're muted, Bart.
Are you mute? You're muted. Sorry about that.
I'm back again. Sorry, I muted myself. I remember a story from Marshall Rosenberg, who's the proponent of nonviolent communication, and how he's talking to somebody who was talking about their efforts to combat bullies in their school. And the guy looked out the window and saw some kid really beating up a smaller kid. And so he ran out there and grabbed the big guy and like shook him and yelled at him and everything, and see, and said, I really showed him. Well, yeah, what you showed is that as long as you have a bigger stick, you can deal with the bully for that moment. But that doesn't really address the bullying itself. I think it's a lot of complicated things that made the conditions that allowed someone like Putin to be in charge of Russia. And so it's not, and I just don't like the idea of it simplifying it, saying, well, he's a bully, now we should get rid of him. Well, we've had bullies in our country too. It's a much bigger question that needs a lot more time to sort out.
Thank you.
We are also interested in entering into a very kind of different world response than we've ever had before. The kind of the unity of so many nations who've stood up and have entered into sanctions against Russia. I mean, the first time we've ever tested this as much as we can. While Russia has found a way around those things, that's not likely to last for very much longer. Certainly by the summer, they're going to be in dire straits financially. And it's going to lead them into more of that view that they're hunkering down against the world, which is the kind of goes back to that theme I said of homeostasis. After Yushchenko was given presidency, and of course he was Western facing, and Yanukovych was Eastern facing, that they started using the term that they were fascists, that fascists had taken over control, and that the idea that someone else was not being supportive of the Slavic people, and that these people were actually a Western born type of thing. And so it's the thing is that Russia is going to continue to hunker down, as you see this overwhelming support within Russia for Putin's aggression, because of this sense of besieged mentality that is going on there. And that's what happens to any of the groups, from Boko Haram to any of the other groups, where they think that other groups are attacking them, and then therefore that they must attack some other people in response. So it does kind of leave in that cycle that Bart was talking about. But it's also the people who feel marginalized and excluded or pushed out from the world stage, who consistently, of course, lead to these various forms of violence. And we have to just kind of response by that is to find, yes, here's the stick, but here's the way back. And that way back also has to be with, the ways that we can restore and repair. And, I'd like to see that rhetoric, to maybe to Bart's point, that we offer Russia the way back. I don't think they're going to be responding to that anytime soon, though, unfortunately.
Thank you. Next from Dave Hallett. I'm curious what the average citizen can do to promote more of a civil and just world, especially as it seems we are becoming more polarized as a society.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the central question, right? Is what is the response? How do we repair that fabric. And the thing that I think Bart was speaking passionately about, that this alternative culture that we need to have. And I think that's where we do have to focus our efforts as an ethical society. You know, at the Ethical Society here, based on the work I've done in other places, I think we have to be able to address what are the needs of our community, how we're meeting those needs, how we're responding to the challenges people have for all kinds of what we might just think are basic human needs, first of all, and then also creating places where people can not just survive, but can flourish with innovations and job training and all these other kind of things. And the history of successful movements has not been one overarching idea that's driven large numbers of people towards it. It's been one or two local attractors who then create a sense of that community and connection and support that attracts and connects with other people and builds a network from that. And that's typically how change comes about, at least from my perspective. So we have opportunities because we have buildings and places and land and societies for us to be able to do these things. I think one of the things we're lacking is that most of us don't go to the community to get those basic needs, right? Most of our basic needs are survived by jobs. We have other money. We don't really need others. We can come into the society. I mean, we may get a sense of feeling connection, a sense of community, but our other community needs are not met. That's not true of other groups, even within the United States, who abandon community to meet those kinds of other needs. And that's the refocusing I think we need to do, and then continue to build a network across the United States.
Thank you. James, would you like to respond to that?
I actually agree a lot with Curt. I think that our local community is where we can start to make the most tangible difference. And all movements start with small groups of people who decide they want to make a change, growing out and expanding their influence. The one concrete thing I'd suggest people do if you need a sense of hope and a sense of efficacy is learn how to be a community organizer. Take a class in it because it really works. And most people don't have that skill set. Most people don't really know anything about what social change actually takes to make happen. So learn, like go take a class or join a union or some local organizing group, or encourage your ethical society to do a class in community organizing and get involved in some campaigns to change specific things in your area. And I think that will show a lot about how we can build up bigger changes through small local activities.
Great.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with both of them.
Great, thank you. Bart, this next question is addressed to you from Jacqueline and Fred. It seems that you do not address the issue of omission versus commission bias by not intervening. We are committing harm against Ukrainians who are dying, being raped and disappeared, as well as the Russian protesters who have been, I just can't quite read that, hold on. Who have, the way my screen is moving, I can't quite get it, but as well as also the Russian protesters who are speaking out against the war and being punished for that.
Yeah, sadly,
they said, let me just say, they said that's for you, Bart, but they'd appreciate all the panelists' responses. Okay, go ahead. You start.
Okay, I guess the first thing is we really don't have the power to change those things that are listed there. We just don't. We don't have the way into that, and having a strong point of view or opinion is not going to change that fact. On the other end, we do have the opportunity before us to try to figure out how people can live their lives in ways that are better than what we're seeing there. And I think it's a good time to be really thoughtful about that and wonder, what are the ways that we can do that? We can do more of that.
Curt?
Yeah, I was watching something on China and thinking about their involvement and support of what's going on in Ukraine and how maybe a powerful nation can do that, can enter as well. And of course, that's not usually how the Chinese culture works. The Chinese, I think, are watching this very, very closely because their own imperial aspirations may be in check here. That 80% of their power production actually comes from overseas, as does 80% of their food. They're not in a place, even with Russia, with their small amount of green land there in the corner there, to be able to supply for their own population. I think what I'd love to see is how this united effort works. And our message certainly should be to say consistently that this is what we need to do. We need to challenge the other nations that are not participating into this. But we also need to, in my perspective, is create places where natural resources and things like that, which are only going to get worse with climate change, don't become bargaining chips for countries to invade of other places. Right? This is a prelude to what it's going to look like in another 40, 50 years, just with mass migrations and things like that. And I agree with, we have to start making some desperate, indeed, changes now. And our society should be models and training places for how to do that, so that our youth can come up through our organizations and go out and build that model of community and cooperation and interdependence with autonomy. I mean, and that connection and that reciprocity, which is central to our message. Our central message within ethical culture is the power of reciprocity. And I don't want to lose that also in our ability to get anything done.
Thank you. James.
I think I agree with the questioner that there is a sin of inaction if we say that the right thing to do is effectively nothing. I'm always very wary of making ethical judgments about things that nations and large groups of people do that are related too closely to what is right in individual circumstances. But with that in mind, I can't help thinking that of the time when I was a teenager and a big gang of kids from another school started beating the crap out of me in a crowded station, and nobody did anything about it. And they were culpable too. And we, frankly, to put it bluntly, the United States is a country with the biggest stick right now. We have clout that we can use to help people who really need it. And I can't help but think it's wrong. They are asking for this assistance. The people of Ukraine are very clear what they want. They want bullets. They want Stinger missiles. They want javelins. They want artillery to defend their country. And so would most Americans if we were being invaded, I believe. And we can provide that. And so it seems to me the instinctive response might well be the right one in this case. Let's give them what they are asking for.
Thank you. I'm skipping ahead. There's several comments I encourage you all to read. And the interest of time, we only have 15 minutes left. I'm skipping ahead so that we can hear from people we haven't heard from yet in a question form. And I think that's Vandra. She says, can you say more about the resistance within Ukraine? And I guess that's addressed to any of you.
Well, you know, no matter of bombs or stingers or smart missiles that we can send that way will have had anywhere the fact if we did in fact have Ukrainian people who want to stand up and pretty much supportive and tell Russia no, which also includes the Donbass region of Russian-speaking people who do not see themselves as a part of Russia. They do see themselves as ethnically Russian-speaking, right? And I think the success of the Ukrainian people is perhaps because they went through their own Orange Revolution, is that they built these small, tight cells of connected people working together to stand up against authoritarian dictatorships. We should learn as much in this country how to do that well, is to build up these very, very strong cells. And because Ukraine had so many of this, you don't have anyone at the top saying, like Zelensky, anyone, y'all need to go over here and fight this, or you need to do this. The people themselves have found their own power of resistance and empowerment. And I think that's the beautiful thing that I think that's kind of emerged out of this horror and atrocity is the fact that Ukrainian people found their own voice in a way to say, hell no. And so that's my take on it.
Thank you. Either the other two of you want to respond? James?
Sure. There are some incredibly inspiring examples of things that Ukrainian people themselves are doing to resist Russian aggression, not just militarily, but also through all sorts of nonviolent resistance. I showed the image of the young person kneeling in front of a tank. There are many examples of people non-violently resisting and providing community support in that way. I recommend you look up Ukrainian independent journalists on Twitter who are providing some of the best on the ground information about this, although you have to be careful because there's a lot of misinformation and propaganda out there as well. One thing I read about today that I found particularly inspiring is that folks are crowdsourcing information about where Russian troops are attacking and using a specially developed app to tell people, firstly, where to leave so that they can be safe, but also to tell their own military forces where they can counterattack. to get the Russians out of there. So it's a huge range of different forms of resistance, and I'm finding it very inspiring.
Thank you. And Bart, you said you had nothing you wanted to add to that?
That's right. Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
So the next question, again, there's some really great comments. The next question is from Elaine Durbach, who asks, looking beyond the current fighting, assuming Russia withdraws, does anyone see how we anti-war movements can promote a healing between those two populations?
I wish I was optimistic about any kind of withdrawal that's going to be happening anytime soon. I don't think it's going in that direction. Frankly, myself, I think it's just going to get worse just because of the type of rhetoric that's running, I think, to the mind of not only Putin, but the Russian people as well. However, that being said, I think that what we can consistently do is to offer to the Russian people, just like we did with Cuba, is that we're supportive of you. We're supportive of what needs to happen up there. We also understand that you are also under these things. Now, whether they hear that message in a tightly controlled media is one thing, but the world has changed. People have access to information in ways that they didn't have, and we need to consistently promote that and again and again and again those messages, which is the reason why it's also important. I think we have an EC delegation to Ukraine afterwards, or through Slovakia or Poland, and to go into there and say, okay, we're with groups here, we want to take a stand. I personally don't work much with the Orthodox because the Orthodox are have a stand against syncretism. They're not allowed to work with groups such as us. That's what I've been told, frankly, to my face by several Orthodox. And I want to make sure that the community that gets rebuilt in Ukraine is exactly the one that the people were building before the revolution. And with the Pora, which is these small cells of people connected together who support each other. The worst thing are small groups of people fighting each other like a Lebanon, right? So that whole sense of, yeah, we're tied to our little cell, but our cell is not connected to other places. That's the opposite message. We make sure that everybody gets support and feels a part of that.
Thank you. Bart?
Yeah, so I was thinking of a story of a father who was dealing with a son who had broken something. I forget it was a fence or exactly what it was, but and in the course of their conversations, had the kid try to fix it. And his point was, once you break something, it's always broken. You can try to repair it, but the worse you break it, the harder the repair is. And, it's something I really worry about with the infusion of so many billions of dollars into this conflict, is that it gives that many more opportunities for people to do horrible things to each other, that it's going to make the repair a whole lot harder.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, I think Bart is right about that. He's not wrong that there are huge risks to flooding this area of the world with tons of weapons. Who knows who and how those are going to be used in the future? And the longer this goes on, the harder it is. We'll get to see any kind of rebuilt relationships between the peoples of Russia and Ukraine. I have two thoughts about it. The first is, you don't tell an abuse victim to repair relationships with their abuser until they're safe and they're way out of the situation. And right now, the Ukrainians are the abuse victims and they're being actively abused. They don't have a responsibility to the Russian government or the Russian people to make nice with them and to repair relations. They have a right to get the boot off their neck. And once they've achieved that, then we can maybe speak about the longer term question. The thing that gives me some hope for a longer term kind of rapprochement between the two peoples is that many of the people of Russia do not want this war. It's very difficult to get a realistic sense of how supported the war is within Russia, because who can trust any data that you get? There is significant support for Putin among Russians, but there is a lot of protesting happening in Russia itself, which is being ruthlessly resisted by the Russian government itself. But that suggests to me that many understand that this is not a war they should be engaged in. And that might suggest some openings for some sort of future relationship that's better than this.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back up now and take a question from Jeff. He asks, how far does self-defense go as an exception to nonviolent resistance? And I'm guessing he's kind of directing that towards you, Bart, but anybody can feel free to answer.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm not exactly sure what that means. How far does self-defense go as an exception? I think, to my mind, self-defense is something that is bound to happen. The real question is it right? And that's probably where I differ with a number of other people. I mean, my sense is it's probably not right, even to defend yourself in most circumstances. If defending yourself means that you are utilizing the same kind of violence that you don't want used against yourself.
Thank you. Jean, I was going to ask you to follow up to that in the next question. Would Bart suggest that we don't give the Ukrainians arms? And I think you probably pretty much answered that, but if you want to.
I don't think that was a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to see if there's any other questions. There's a lot of, as I said, really great comments in here. I encourage everyone to read. Bondra asked, can we find other nonviolent peace building organizations to join? And maybe you guys have some off the top of your head that you can think of that would be good to be allied with.
Quakers.
Quakers.
The question in my mind is, what is a peace building organization? Because I get worried, obviously, I get worried with peace building organizations whose idea of peace is you can do anything you want to me and I'm never going to stand up for myself. That doesn't sound to me like peace. That sounds like a recipe for domination of the weakest. Maybe it's because I'm gay, right? Maybe it's because the history of the movement for my rights involved people banding together in their communities, carrying clubs and whistles to protect themselves against the people who would prey on us. And I think that's not only ethically justifiable, I think it's fantastic. So maybe that background is informing my reaction to this, but I tend to think that peace, one of the things that ensures peace are clear boundaries and consequences for misbehavior. And if there are no consequences when people abuse other people, you don't have peace. You have rule by the most powerful. So if only we had a UN that was willing to take action when things like this happened, or a Security Council that was willing to actually do something, then maybe we would have some more real peace building organizations instead of ones that talk about peace, but who would adopt policies that would allow the Putins of the world to run riot.
Thank you. Curt, any other comments?
Well, I would imagine that a lot of people who are on this call who are looking at this, of course, went through the 70s and the Vietnam War. And part of our kind of feeling is that participating in violence leads to us to become violent ourselves, right? Think of the My Lai massacre and other things where we were in there for other reasons to defend the Vietnam people against North Vietnam and Chinese aggression. And yet we ended up becoming savages ourselves in certain places and repeating things that were being done in other places. So there's always that fear of those kinds of stuff. And so we always had to, we had to be able to say, yes, stand up, stand your ground, be firm. As James told the story that resonate also as a gay person, that if you see someone getting bullied, the whole community says, hey, stop that, with the loudest voice that they can do at that time. But it's also just realizing that Russia's going to pay a heavy price for this. I mean, they already had a very, very small youth population. That number is now being thrown to the fodder of warfare once again. They don't have enough young people in their country to even support their own nation because of their isolationist practices and things like that. And because 33% are addicted to heroin and alcohol. It's just, it's a real tragedy what's going on there. It's going to lead to further kind of violence. So yes, I want it to stop, like anyone else on this call. We want it to stop. We want it to go away. We want it for people to pay reparations. We want to put the things back. And we also have to think about what was the price that's just been paid by all these countries by what's going on. It's just going to reverberate for a long time to come.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question. From Sandra, this isn't a direct message to me, so it's not going to show up on your chat. But she asked, why does it make sense to support Ukraine while we sell weapons to bomb Yemen? Double standards make me doubt purity of U.S. response. So if you guys want to briefly take that on, and then you can have like maybe a minute to make one final closing statement each.
The official response, of course, is that those are civil wars. They're not one country invading another. So sometimes the official response is that that's just infighting, that we don't get involved. But if it's one nation invading, that's supposedly the reason to do that. I think that's not quite true, because often what's happening in places where there's even civil war, there are marginalized communities and all these other kinds of stuff who are already on the outs, right? And it's the others who are where they're invaders. So yeah, I totally agree. I think to a certain extent that we can just continue to arm everybody, and just like in Texas, we think if we give everybody a handgun, the world's going to be safer. And the only thing is we've discovered in Texas, it's led to a spike in violent crime, right? Using handguns. I mean, that's, you give young, uneducated men or men have all kinds of stripes, a hammer, and they're going to end up pounding each other. So that's where we are. So I think it has to be balanced and tempered and smart and intelligent, but we need to think of limited, targeted strategies for groups who are looking for certain kinds of things. We need criminal courts, we need international responses, and not just handing out weapons. That's it.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's totally hypocritical. And US foreign policy and the foreign policy of many nations in this regard to care about the invasion of Ukraine and not many of the countless other abuses of people's human rights all over the world, many of which Curt mentioned in his opening statement, is totally wrong and hypocritical. We should get a lot more involved in a lot more places in order to create a world where everyone can truly be safe. But the fact that we get it wrong at other times does not mean we can't get it right this time.
Thank you. Bart?
Yeah, I guess if you invest a lot of money in a really big hammer, it's hard not to use it. And so it would really be helpful if we could find ways to invest in some other things, and maybe not invest quite so much in defense and military stuff.
Thank you. And Bart, any closing words you want to share real quick? We're right at 9:30.
Got it. I guess the main thing is, saying that you're not going to resist violently doesn't mean you're not going to resist. It means that you are accepting limitations on how far you'll go and in what way you'll go.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, just thank everyone for the discussion. I think it's a difficult issue. I don't know whether there's a right answer, but my main thought is defending yourself against violence is an assertion of your own dignity. It is not taking away someone else's.
Thank you. And Curt?
And I'm thank you all, and very much in creating the climate of culture that prevents the next war, which is coming down the line, several wars, and that I'm hoping that we can continue the conversations about what our society should be doing and how we can address those things. And we play a very critical role. I hope we can continue to play that role in the future as well.
Thank you. And I want to give it again a shout out to Carolyn and the Ethical Action Committee of the American Ethical Union, and to all of you who took time out of your night to come to be a part of this important conversation. These things matter, and we find solutions best when we come together with open hearts and curious minds. So thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Nori, for guiding the ship along here. Very nice.
Thank you so much. Take care and good night.